My younger brother put his car into the concrete barrier on the 401 at 11:17 on a Wednesday night in October. He was driving home from a bar in Mississauga with a blood alcohol level of 0.171, more than twice the legal limit in Ontario. And he hadn't buckled his seatbelt. 3 fractured ribs, a punctured lung, a concussion severe enough that the doctors made us wait 4 hours before we could go in. He spent 8 days in the ICU at Credit Valley Hospital before they moved him to a regular ward. My older brother didn't come. Didn't text, didn't call. He'd cut off contact with me 10 months earlier, and by the time my younger brother's car hit that barrier, my older brother was living in Calgary with a new phone number I had to pay a private investigator $1,500 to find. I'm 33 years old, and I've spent the last 14 months learning, slowly and in great detail, what it costs to protect the wrong person. My older brother, I'll call him Rhett, is 6 years older than me, and 8 years older than our younger brother Gabe. We grew up in Oakville, Ontario, in a house our parents bought in the late 90s, back when Oakville was expensive and the state still felt manageable rather than obscene. Rhett was always the one who made sense of things. Civil engineer. He spent the first decade of his career on municipal infrastructure projects around the GTI. The kind of work that's unglamorous and essential and pays better the longer you do it without losing your mind. He was methodical about money in a way that my parents admired quietly, and Gabe and I teased him about when we were young. Every paycheck, some amount went somewhere. Retirement savings. An investment account he opened at 23. A TFSA he maxed out every January. When our grandfather died 7 years ago, Rhett used part of his inheritance to buy a 2-bedroom condo in downtown Toronto. Waterfront adjacent, solid location, the kind of place that makes sense in hindsight, even if it stretched your budget at the time. The remainder of grandfather's estate stayed in a family trust, with Rhett named as the primary trustee. He'd gained full discretionary control when he turned 30. We'd never asked him what that meant. Exactly. We'd assumed it meant he had some administrative responsibility, and that was the end of it. He met his wife. I'll call her Portia, at a professional development conference in Ottawa. She was a corporate lawyer, sharp, composed, not the kind of person who warmed to you immediately, but someone you found yourself respecting more the longer you knew her. They married after 2 years of dating, a small ceremony in the Niagara wine region, immediate family and close friends only. There was a prenuptial agreement. Rhett mentioned it once, matter-of-factly, without making it a conversation. Nobody pressed him on it. That was Rhett. He handled things and moved on. Gabe is different. Gabe has always been different. And I used to say that like it was charming. He spent his mid-20s, chasing a career in music production. First in Toronto, then out in Vancouver for almost 2 years, doing the kind of creative hustle that looks meaningful on Instagram and generates very little actual income. He came back to Oakville 8 months before everything fell apart. He was 26, nearly broke, sleeping in our parents' spare room, and talking the way he always did when things weren't going his way. Confidently, about a fresh start, about things being different this time. I was the one who suggested he stay with Rhett and Portia. Their condo had a second bedroom sitting empty. Rhett was commuting constantly for a bridge rehabilitation project up near Barrie, and was home late most nights. Portia's firm was in the thick of a major corporate transaction. And she was billing 70-hour weeks. I told myself the arrangement made practical sense. Gabe could save some money, get back on his feet, and be out within 3 or 4 months. I didn't think carefully about what I was actually doing. I didn't think about the fact that I was sending my 26-year-old brother, who had spent 2 years making choices based on what felt good in the moment, into the home of a couple who was rarely in the same room. Rhett agreed without hesitation, because that's who he is. He set up the spare room, handed over a key, told Gabe he was welcome as long as he was working towards something. Gabe thanked him and moved in the following weekend. For a few months, nothing seemed wrong. Rhett was always at a job site or in a meeting, or stuck on the 400 heading north. Gabe picked up some audio engineering work for a small local label. Not much, but something. Portia mentioned once at a family dinner that it was nice not coming home to an empty place. I registered that as a good sign. Then my phone rang on a Thursday afternoon in December. Rhett's name on the screen. I picked up expecting something unremarkable. A question about Christmas plans, maybe something to do with the parents. I need to meet with you. His voice had no texture in it. Not angry, not upset, just completely flat, the way a surface goes flat when everything that was on it has been swept off. Of course. What's going on? Your place. 2 o'clock. Rhett, what happened? Is everything all right? He hung up. I stood in my kitchen and held my phone, and felt something cold and formless settle in my stomach. Rhett doesn't call family meetings. He doesn't operate that way. He handles things himself quietly, and you find out after the fact. If he was asking for a meeting, using that voice, something had gone badly wrong. I tried calling back, voicemail, texted him. No response, called Gabe, no answer. I spent Friday running through possibilities the way you run through them. When you already know, you're not going to arrive at anything reassuring. Saturday afternoon, Rhett showed up exactly at 2. He sat down in my reading chair across from the couch, not where he usually sat when he came over, and he folded his hands in his lap and looked at me the way someone looks at you when they've rehearsed what they're about to say. So many times it's lost its charge. Gabe and Portia have been sleeping together. I found out 3 weeks ago. I've confirmed it. I'm telling you as a courtesy because you'll hear about it eventually. And I'd prefer you hear it from me. I heard the words. I understood them individually. My brain refused to let them mean what they meant. That can't be. Gabe wouldn't. I know what I walked into. Maybe there's an explanation. There isn't. He stood. He hadn't touched the coffee I'd set out. I've already contacted a lawyer. The divorce process has started. I want you to know that. He picked up his jacket from the arm of the chair. What you do with this is your choice, but choose carefully. He left. But I called him back 3 times. Voicemail each time. Gabe showed up at my door that same night without warning. He looked like he'd been crying since Rhett found out. Wrecked and hollow and smaller than I'd ever seen him. He sat on my couch and talked for almost an hour. How it started. How it wasn't supposed to mean anything. How he knew it was wrong from the beginning and told himself it was contained. Manageable, temporary. How he'd never intended for Rhett to find out. Listening to him, I kept thinking about when he was 14. And I was 21. And he'd scraped up a neighbor's car with his bike and hidden it for 3 days. He'd sat across from me then, with the same look. That particular combination of guilt and exhaustion that comes from carrying something too heavy, for too long in the wrong direction. I'd been the one to go with him to the neighbor's house, to help him make it right. I should have been more careful about how deeply that instinct runs in me. My parents came over the next day. The 4 of us sat around my kitchen table, and said things I'm not proud of now. Someone mentioned Christmas. Someone mentioned what people at the club would think when the divorce became public knowledge. Someone observed that Rhett, to his credit, was strong, had always been strong, and had built a life that could absorb a setback, whereas Gabe was fragile in ways that Rhett wasn't. I know how that sounds. I know exactly how it sounds. But at that kitchen table on that Sunday morning, I was afraid of what would happen to Gabe if he had to live in the full consequence of what he'd done. And I was afraid of the family's tasty splintering beyond repair. And underneath all of that, somewhere I wasn't looking directly at, I was also afraid of the holidays becoming something I couldn't manage. So I called Rhett and asked to come over. He answered. He let me in. I sat at his kitchen island and delivered a speech I'd spent the weekend building. Family, forgiveness. What people look like on the other side of hard things when they choose grace over instinct. Gabe was 26. Gabe was impulsive and hadn't thought clearly, and would not survive losing his brother on top of everything else. Had Rhett considered counseling? Had he thought about what the alternative actually meant, for our parents, for family dinners, for the long run? Rhett sat on the other side of the island, and let me finish, without once interrupting. When I was done, he was quiet for a moment. Just sitting there, both hands flat on the counter. You want me to forgive him? I want you to consider what's worth holding on to. Okay, he said. I'll handle it quietly, the way you want. I drove home feeling like I'd done something good. I told my parents the same evening. It was going to be all right. Rhett was processing. Just give him room. I didn't notice, not until much later, that he hadn't said he'd forgiven anyone. He'd only said he'd be quiet. I gave it 2 weeks. Nothing from Rhett. I told myself that was fine. He was working through it. That was reasonable. I told Gabe the same thing. I told my parents the same thing. We all agreed without saying so directly that we'd given Rhett the framework, and now we just needed to let him come to terms with it. The divorce papers arrived in February. Portia received them by courier at her firm. The prenuptial agreement held on every line. It was as Rhett had told us, it was airtight. The condo had been purchased with Rhett's inheritance before the marriage, and was legally, unambiguously, his. Portia was entitled to her personal belongings, her car, and nothing else. Within the week, Rhett's cell number was out of service. His personal email came back undeliverable. I went to the condo building and found his name no longer on the intercom directory. A neighbor I recognized from a party 2 years earlier said he'd moved out without much notice. I called his office. The firm's receptionist was professional and kind and completely immovable. Rhett had left instructions that no contact from family members be passed through. I told her I was his brother. She said she understood. And she was sorry, but those were his instructions. My father drove downtown and tried in person. Building security informed him, at the front desk, that he was on a restricted list and would need to leave. My father came home, looking like someone had taken something structural out of him. The for sale sign went up on the condo 3 months later. I drove past it and had to pull over. I knew what the waterfront market was like. I called the listing agent and said I was a potential buyer interested in the building. She was helpful right up until I mentioned I was a family member, and then she said, very evenly, that the seller had been explicit. No contact with certain parties, and she couldn't assist me further. She sold the unit for $847,000. I found out from a public listing after the fact. Then came the meeting at the Bay Street lawyer's office. Our grandfather had established a family trust 23 years earlier. We had always known it existed in the abstract. Rhett had been named primary trustee at age 30. The lawyer, a man in his 60s with the professionally measured manner of someone who has delivered difficult news before and prefers not to editorialize, slid a document across his mahogany desk and told us he was required to notify us of changes. Rhett had exercised his trustee authority in full. My parents and Gabe had been removed as contingent beneficiaries. The family interest in the Muskoka cottage property, 3 acres on a lake, a place our grandfather had built in the 1970s, a place that would sell in today's market for somewhere between $900,000 and $1.1 million, had been legally partitioned. Rhett had sold his administrative share to a third party. The remainder of the trust had been restructured. Primary recipients upon Rhett's death were now 3 registered charities and a scholarship fund at his university. The current value of the trust, after the property transaction and restructuring, was approximately $1.4 million. I had been treating that trust as a background fact of my future. I hadn't thought about it carefully enough to call it a plan. I wasn't that deliberate about it. But somewhere in the back of my mind, future distribution from that trust was going to help me buy into the Toronto property market, which, if you know anything about the Toronto property market, you understand is not a casual aspiration. It's the difference between a life and a different kind of life. My mother asked the lawyer if there was any recourse. He said there wasn't. The trust had been designed specifically to give the primary trustee that authority. There was no legal basis for a challenge. He said it gently, but he said it clearly. We drove home without speaking. The cottage. I kept coming back to that. We'd spent 2 weeks up there every summer for most of our childhood. The dock Rhett and I had helped our grandfather repair. The summer Rhett turned 16. The particular color of the light on the water in the early morning, that place had felt like a permanent feature of the family. Something that would always exist and always be ours. It had never been ours. It had always been his to steward or to dissolve. We'd just never thought to ask. Gabe deteriorated. He moved back into our parents' spare room in Oakville and stopped making much forward movement. He called Rhett's disconnected number the way you call a number when the calling is the point, not the connection. Portia stopped returning his messages sometime in the spring. By early summer she'd moved on from the address and, apparently, the chapter. She was seeing someone new within months. The symmetry of that, Gabe helping her leave the marriage and then being left behind himself, had a kind of inevitability to it that I'm not sure he ever fully processed. He drank more than he should. He went quiet in ways that made me nervous. I hired the private investigator in late summer. It cost Lefty $800 and took 3 days. I got an address in Inglewood, Calgary, a new cell number, and the general information that Rhett had transferred to his firm's Calgary office, and appeared to be doing well. I called on a Thursday evening. My hands were shaking in a way I hadn't expected. It rang twice. Hello. His voice. After 11 months of silence, his actual voice. I told him about Gabe. The 401, the blood alcohol, the 8 days in ICU. I told him I knew I had no right to expect anything, but that Gabe had asked for him, and that I was asking on behalf of all of us, and that I was sorry, that I knew I'd chosen wrong. Is he going to serve? The question came out so even, so cleanly, that it stopped everything I was about to say. Yes, he'll survive. Then there's nothing more I can do for you. Take care. The line went dead. I called back immediately. The number you have dialed is not currently accepting calls from your number. Blocked. In real time, while we were still on the same call. I told my father. He flew to Calgary the following week, used the PI's address to find the building. A glass tower near the Bow River, downtown, the kind of building that says someone has rebuilt their life and done it well. The concierge called upstairs. Rhett said no. My father waited on the sidewalk outside for 4 hours. In October, in Calgary, which is not a comfortable place to wait in October. At 6 in the evening, Rhett came out. My father told me about it afterward. Sitting at my kitchen table with his coat still on, like he hadn't remembered to take it off. He said Rhett stopped when he saw him. Didn't look surprised. Didn't look angry. Just stood there on the sidewalk while the evening foot traffic moved around them, and said what he had to say. I did exactly what you asked me to do. You wanted quiet. You wanted the family kept together. You wanted me to absorb it and move on so that nobody had to deal with the consequences of what happened. I did all of that. I stayed quiet. I moved, I'm gone. Rhett shifted his bag on his shoulder. You got what you wanted. It just doesn't look the way you imagined. My father started to say something about Gabe, about the hospital, about blood mattering. I want Gabe to recover, Rhett said. I genuinely mean that. But his choices aren't my responsibility and neither are yours. They stopped being my responsibility the night the three of you sat in a room with me and decided that what I'd been through was something I should manage quietly, so everyone else could stay comfortable. He looked at my father. Don't come here again. Then he walked away. Just turned and went down the street and didn't look back. My father came home. We sat at my kitchen table for a long time without saying much. Gabe was discharged from Credit Valley, with a walker, some physiotherapy referrals, and a follow-up with a psychiatrist at the hospital's outpatient clinic. He was quieter than I'd ever known him. The easy carelessness, that thing that had always made him seem like the world, was something happening specifically for his amusement, was gone. Something more careful had taken its place. I didn't know yet whether to call that growth or damage. Probably both. He moved into a bachelor apartment in Hamilton about a year after the accident. Small, not much in it, cheap enough to manage on the part-time studio work he'd picked up. It was his. That mattered to him in a way I think the old Gabe would have been embarrassed by. My parents and I wrote Rhett a letter that winter. We spent 4 evenings on it, rewriting and cutting and starting over. We tried to say what should have been said the night he sat in my living room and told us what had happened. That his pain mattered. That we'd chosen wrong and we knew it. That protecting Gabe from consequences had not, in the end, protected Gabe. That we'd mistaken Rhett's competence and steadiness for an unlimited capacity to absorb whatever the family needed him to absorb. That we were sorry, not in the way that wants something back, just sorry. I mailed it to the Calgary address. It was never returned. Whether he read it or didn't read it, he chose not to answer. That was a kind of answer. I still check his LinkedIn occasionally. He was promoted to senior project manager last year. His profile photo changed in the spring. Outdoor shot, mountains somewhere behind him, the particular ease of a person who has put significant distance between themselves and the thing that broke them. At an engineering awards event last November, there's a photo of him with colleagues. A woman stands beside him in the way people stand when they're more than colleagues. He looks like himself, just lighter. I think about the Saturday afternoon he sat in my reading chair and I delivered the speech I'd spent a weekend building. I think about how certain I was that I was the reasonable one, the one keeping things from falling apart. The one who understood that Philly is worth the discomfort of hard conversations. I was keeping something together. Just not what I thought. Rhett never needed us to manage things for him. He never needed protection or mediation or anyone to handle him carefully. What he needed, the only time I can remember that he actually needed something from us, was for someone to stand beside him and say, what happened to you is wrong. And your pain matters, and we are here. We didn't do that. I didn't do that. The Muskoka cottage belongs to someone else now. I drove past the turnoff on the way to a camping trip last August and didn't take it. My parents and I rent a place on a different lake for a week each summer. It's fine. It's just not the same, and it won't be. Some things don't go back to what they were. Some things never were what you thought they were. Gabe is sober and working and going to his appointments. My parents are fine in the way that is technically fine and emotionally not, which is probably what the rest of their lives will look like. I see my younger brother on Sundays when schedules allow. We talk about normal things. We don't talk about Rhett very often. When we do, it's careful and brief, and leaves a residue that lasts the rest of the day. 800 kilometers away, my older brother is building infrastructure for a city that didn't know him when he arrived, and he is apparently very good at it. And he is living a life that doesn't include us. He won't be at my parents' table for Christmas. He won't be at whatever family occasion comes next. He might someday build a life with someone who will never know our names, and their children, if there are children, will grow up, not knowing what their father's family looked like, or why they're absent. We asked him to be quiet. He gave us something permanent. That's the price. That's the shape of what we built by choosing wrong. I sit in it now the way you sit in something that can't be fixed. Not fixed, just carried. You learn to carry it. You don't stop noticing the weight. We thought we were holding the family together. We learned too late that we were the ones taking it apart.